Bron the dinosaur is one of the most popular characters in all of Poppy Playtime, and today I wanted to take a deep look into his character to figure out his story, his purpose in the game, and why I even think he could be in Poppy Playtime Chapter 3. Like the video if you end up enjoying, but let's get right into it. So starting simple as always, Bron the dinosaur was one of the first Playtime Co toys to ever be created, being made in 1961 before being turned into the big monster we know today years later. And despite his extreme importance to both the game story and Chapter 3, as we will talk about later, Bron doesn't make much of an appearance in any games. In Chapter 1, despite literally being seen moving in the trailer, makes no appearance at all. And in Chapter 2, we see a couple dead versions of him that only stand to be obstacles for the player to move past. And in the build-up for Chapter 3, he's shown up multiple times, including in his own VHS tape, despite making no appearance. So what's going on here? Well, first, I wanted to break down his first and currently only appearance in Chapter 2. See, after beating Bunzo Bunny, we make our way to the rejected toys room where we see a bunch of mini toys, including little Brons and other scrap stuff, along with two larger Brons seen at the end of the room who, judged by their size, are presumably a part of the Bigger Bodies Initiative. The initiative that, as I've said a million times on this channel, was built to turn the orphans in the factory into toys to work for the company, like Huggy the security guard and Mommy Longlegs the daycare attendant at the game station. However, what's super unique about Bron is that we see two different bigger bodies of him in one room, and also both are completely different sizes as well, so which one is the real Bron? Well, if you look at both of their bodies, we could see that they were both living creatures, at least at one point, having blood or missing eye sockets where eyes once were, so we know that they were both experiments in the factory just like most toys. But judged by the fact that they are in the rejected toys room, I actually think that neither of these toys are the real Bron, in that both of these are actually failed experiments that were done when trying to create the creature. They're both different sizes, they aren't alive anymore with no real purpose in the factory, so they appear to instead be failed experiments of presumably the real Bron, who we haven't seen in the game yet. In fact, we actually see something similar happen when we look at Bron's Chapter 3 VHS tape Restricted Restoration, where we hear a story of a 59-year-old man, Thomas Clark, who was diagnosed with cancer and therefore volunteered to be turned into the Bron toy to advance experimentation for the factory. The only problem is that when they turned Bron into this toy, he showed no reported signs of even being conscious and was put into a storage area with the rest of the toys, where he was immediately attacked by Boxy Boo and was locked into solitary confinement for the rest of his short life. Now, the purpose of this tape for the most part has been kept relatively unknown, but what's interesting is that when we see the Bron toy scanning the area around him, he sees toys from the Bigger Bodies Initiative like PJ Pugapillar and even Kissy Missy, who we see fleeing the scene after he is attacked, pretty much confirming that this tape had to be recorded after the Bigger Bodies Initiative, which was created in the 70s to 80s. But even more interestingly, as we mentioned, we saw Kissy in the same room as Bron, which is a character who we've actually seen before in her own VHS tape is stored in a room titled Storage B, which is an area based on what we saw where toys from the Bigger Bodies Initiative were kept and transferred around, and we can even see familiar faces in this room like the PJ Pugapillar toy and the Candy Cat, among others that were in both locations. And in the thumbnail for Bron's VHS, we can actually see a couple of Playtime Co bins behind him, which as far as I know are only ever seen in Storage B from Kissy's tape, making me believe that the room Bron was in here was in fact Storage B, which outside of being a fun fact matters because when you look at both angles of the room, you'll notice that there's not a single Bron doll in sight outside of the one that they created here, despite him being by far the oldest toy in Playtime Co made in the 60s. You'd think there'd be more of him than anybody else. Plus, the toys decided to, out of nowhere, attack him despite him literally just being a barely responsive Bron toy like the rest, which makes me wonder if maybe they had never seen a Bron toy before and maybe this experiment was actually a first of its kind. I mean, think about it. If Thomas Clark, the person turned into the Bron doll, actually sacrificed his entire life into research, why would they make him into a mini Bron doll of all things when there's none other inside of the storage room? It's because, as we mentioned before, anytime they tried to make Bron, judged by what we see in the rejected toys room, it failed and he never got to live. So they tried to turn Thomas into a Bron doll as well, which ended up having the exact same outcome where he could barely move. So to me, based on these sparse appearances of dead Bron Bron the dinosaurs, it seems like for whatever reason, the Playtime Co employees were unable to recreate Bron as a toy. They tried small ones, big ones, in between ones, all sorts of other stuff, yet they couldn't get his experiment to work. Hence why we only ever see him dead. That is, except for one occasion. In Chapter 1's gameplay trailer, we very clearly see Bron move, albeit extremely primitively, in a dark area with a make a friend sign that doesn't look like the rejected toys room or anything. And this is who I think the real Bron the dinosaur actually is. And all of the other ones we've talked about in this video are mere failed experiments the developers have been using as tricks and theory bait to try and confuse us all. But if this admittedly skeptical theory is true, there's one big question we still haven't been able to solve. What in the world happened to this alive Bron doll who we never see in game? Well, I actually think I have an idea, and this is where it all ties into Chapter 3. See, in Poppy Playtime Chapter 3's first teaser trailer, we are shown a ton of dead toys and the gas mask, obviously to tease the red gas stuff we know about now. But at the very beginning of the teaser, we are shown a dead Huggy Wuggy, a dead Mommy Longlegs, and finally a dead Bron the dinosaur. Now, at the time, there were two theories for what this could mean. One, this could mean Bron the dinosaur was the Chapter 3 main antagonist, which we know is not true, it's the purple thing. And two, that this was theory bait and didn't mean anything at all. And while I do believe Bron's presence here was meant to throw things off while they worked on the real Chapter 3 main antagonist we see now, if you know the developers, they would never put something like this in the game just because and for no reason. I can 100% guarantee you this has a purpose. What is that purpose, you may ask? Well, if you look at the first couple of characters, it actually shows symbolically how they died in their respective chapters. Huggy Wuggy is fully intact as we see him fall down in one piece at the end of Chapter 1. Mommy Longlegs is cut from her torso exactly how she was after being shredded. And then there's Bron the dinosaur, who is simply decapitated and detached from his body. Which is really weird when you look at the Chapter 3 teaser trailer too, where the first two characters we see are Huggy Wuggy and this new dog toy. Both of which, when seen, are also completely decapitated. The same way that the Bron the dinosaur toy was. And when we move over into the weird statue prototype thing we see at the end of the trailer, you can even spot Huggy's own head and many others on this creature of some sorts. Now, we've theorized about this weird toy combination creature a ton, but judged by the fact that all the pieces on them generally tend to contain the head portion of the body, and we even see characters like the prototype taking Mommy Longlegs' top half, presumably to put on this creature, we can basically confirm that they were specifically trying to collect the heads of these creatures to put on this figure. Now, I can only make guesses here, but I assume they needed the head parts because at least with humans, that's where the brain is contained and the life and knowledge of a creature, which makes me think that this Bron head that we saw here all the way back in August of 2022 is meant to be a form of symbolism for what the prototype and this weird statue are after, being all of the character heads and therefore their knowledge and memory. And as we've talked about in other videos, the main plot of Chapter 3 seems to be about the prototype and collecting the different body parts of dead toys. But as for what happened to the Bron the dinosaur we've been trying to find in this video, well, take a look at the top and there he is. His dead, decapitated head and neck hanging on top of this creature exactly how it did in the Chapter 3 teaser trailer. This, in my opinion, is what I think the teaser was meant to be referring to all the way back then, and this is what happened to the real Bron the dinosaur. Somewhere, somehow in the factory between the Chapter 1 gameplay trailer and now, he ended up being killed and put up on this creature. And I think that while Chapter 3 may not necessarily have him as the main antagonist, I'm confident that this is the developer saying he's going to have a massive part in the chapter, where we will presumably learn about why there were so many failed Bron the dinosaurs around the factory, and maybe could get to see what happened to Bron to put him on this creature because they never explain. That's a lot of assumptions, but all I know is that there are way too many references to Bron for him to just not exist in Chapter 3. And even just speaking technically, he's one of the most popular characters in the entire franchise, yet doesn't even appear in the game at all. So I'm pretty confident that from a fan perspective and a money perspective, that they are for sure gonna include Bron in some way. They've been teasing it for too long at this point. And this also applies to other characters from Chapter 1 and 2, like PJ Pugapillar, who also seems to have his own appearance in Chapter 3 as well, channel, which I talk about a lot more in this video on screen. Subscribe if you enjoyed, and peace out, guys.